Hello, Guard Commanders of the Astra Militarum. It is August 26th, 2026, and there was recently a change to the Militarum field manual. And the Guard received a lot of changes, including points increases, points drops, and even a change to one of the detachments. So in this video, we're going to do a little bit more deep discussion on how changes to other factions will affect the Guard, and we will also have a discussion on the Leman Russ variants and the different loadouts that you want to play moving forward, as well as a discussion on perhaps how the meta will change due to the trends in the GW updates for the Unitorum Field Manual. And as part of the video, I will also be discussing issues that I see currently with what GW has done with the points. And I will discuss ideas that I have and pretty much a wish list on suggestions that I think would help internally balance the Astra Militarum a little bit better. So, to start out, we are going to first discuss Battleline. And you can see here that all the Battleline went down 5 points for 10-man units. And for the Catachan Jungle Fighters and the Death Corps of Krieg, the 20-man units went down by 10 points. So compared to the last Dataslate, this is a very welcome change. Because when 11th edition first came out, Battleline were 75 points for 10 models. And in 10th edition, Battleline were 65 points. So, on top of the nerfs that Guard experienced from the change in rules, 70 points is still very expensive for 10 models, in my opinion. And while this makes command blobs the same points cost as they were at the end of 10th edition, with the Lord Solar Leontus command blob costing 260 points because the command squads are now 5 points cheaper. This does not help Guard very much. The reason why is because, firstly, Battleline already took a nerf from Battle Shock. And in 11th edition, Battle Shock is persisting. And the Cadian command squad changed its datasheet rule so that it can reroll Battle Shock tests while on an objective instead of gaining cover, because that would just be redundant. And the Death Corps of Krieg command squad essentially ignores Battle Shock for the purpose of retaining orders. So while some of the data sheets are okay, in 11th edition, Battle Shock is persisting. So if you don't have those abilities from the command squads, if you're running them as a 10-man unit, then the battle line are still very inefficient. Now, there was a point a long time ago when Catachan Jungle Fighters were 55 points, and they have constantly been getting nerfed. So they went from 55 points to 65 points, and then up to 75 points, and now they're back down to 70 points, but I don't think that they are competitive. Catachan Jungle Fighters, they have Scout 6, but there are so many other units that have the same or similar mobility characteristics that make them better than Catachan Jungle Fighters. Also, Catachan Jungle Fighters, the base battle line, excluding the command squad, only have access to flamers, regular flamers, not heavy flamers. And those are strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. So they're very anemic. And I think that Catachan needs to get more Wargear loadout options, or they just need to go back down to 55 points. And also, the hidden rule in 11th edition hurts Guard. The reason why is because infantry, while they can get the benefit from hidden, Guard is a shooting army. So once you start shooting with your battle line units, they're going to lose hidden. And that means that when you're playing against a melee army like Blood Angels, Guard is going to be at a disadvantage. Because since Blood Angels, for example, are primarily melee, they're going to get the benefit from hidden, and when they fight you, they're still going to retain hidden because they haven't shot. So, due to changes in the rules, Guard infantry has just gotten significantly worse in 11th edition, and reducing a 10-man unit by 5 points doesn't do it justice. Now let's discuss the 20-man units. And in particular, the Death Korps of Krieg kind of got a buff, points wise, from 10th edition. And the reason why is because Death Korps of Krieg used to be 145 in 10th edition. So while all the other Battleline units went up by 25 points, Death Korps of Krieg actually kept its points value at 145 points. And once the Krieg command squad went down to 60 points, it got cheaper. And now with the 20-man unit becoming 135 points, a big blob of Death Korps of Krieg is now 195 points, making it significantly cheaper than what it was in 10th edition. However, I still don't think that Death Korps of Krieg are very good unless you're playing Recon Element or Siege, and that is because, detachment rules aside, there are two changes that happen to other factions, and we're going to start by discussing the Orks. First of all, Orks got some releases of units from their new codex. And some of the units have gotten tougher. Like Flashgits, for example, went up to 3 wounds. So they're a little bit harder to remove. And some of their units, like the mech guns, now have Blast 3. I believe some of their melee units have Cleave 3 as well. So what that means, for those of you who are not experienced with keywords, Blast 3 means that for every 5 models in your unit, that weapon gets an extra 3 attacks. Meaning, if you have a 20-man unit, that's 4 sets of 5 models. So a unit with Blast 3 is getting an extra 12 attacks against a 20-man unit. If you attach a command squad, now you're getting an extra 3 shots on top of that. You're getting 15 shots. So even if you run a maximum mega blob, while in 10th edition, they were kind of a stat check if you're running a full horde army. Now in 11th edition, they're not much of a stat check. There are a lot of enemies that can just blast or cleave right through these large units easily. So that's why while Death Korps of Krieg on paper looks like they got buffed, when you compare it with what other armies are capable of putting out, it needs a little bit more durability or a little bit more of a points cut, in my opinion. Now let's talk about Marines. And this is where we're going to talk about the damage output rather than the durability of infantry units. One of the news was about Space Marines. And Space Marines are losing a lot of units. But I also heard that the toughness value on some of the Marine units are going to go up from toughness 4 to toughness 5. So, like I mentioned before, the Catachan Jungle Fighters have access to a regular Strength 4 Flamer with AP 0 and Damage 1. And that means that when the regular Flamers are firing at Marines, that's essentially a -1 to wound. So, when you look at the game comprehensively and look at all the factions, which a lot of players don't do, Guard actually took a nerf because Space Marines are a very popular and common faction that you'll face. So essentially, Catachan Jungle Fighters on their Flamers took a -1 to wound and they got a very small points drop. So they're not going to be able to skirmish as well as they could before against Marines. Now, when we discuss the special weapons, there is the same effect. So plasma guns with strength 8 could wound Marines on a 2-up. Same with the melta guns with strength 9. At toughness 5, now the plasmas and the meltas are going to be wounding on 3s. So let's just assume that in the future, Guard might get a strength increase and plasma guns go up to strength 9 and melta guns go up to strength 10. Going from toughness 4 to toughness 5 is a big deal because toughness 5 means that strength 9 weapons are still going to be wounding on 3s. You have to get strength 10 weapons now to be wounding on 2s. So while this doesn't affect Genestealer Cult's units as much, because they have different special weapon loadouts, they affect Guard a lot more. And what Genestealer Cults has access to is a strength 10 mining laser. So the toughness increase on Marines does not matter at all. And on their seismic cannon, they're strength 6. So you'd be wounding Marines on 3. And after the toughness increase, you're still going to be wounding Marines on 3. So this is one of the reasons why I kind of moved over to Gene Stealer cults because I personally think that their detachments and their battle line is a lot better suited for the upcoming changes that were previewed. So guard is going to take a huge hit, and they're already at a terrible win rate. So these points drops, they're kind of meaningless unless guard's shooting strength goes up by a lot. Yeah, there are some detachments where you can get bonus strength and bonus AP and stuff, but I still think that these points cuts doesn't do the guard battle line justice. While some people might be cheering these upcoming changes to the rest of the factions, means that guard is not gonna get a buff, and it's actually kind of like a soft nerf. So in my opinion, I think Battleline is still off the table. Unless you're playing in Recon Element, which I will get to later. Okay, now we're gonna discuss a different infantry unit, and those are the heavy weapons teams. First, this is stupid, the side banner, because you can't see very well, but the Cadian heavy weapon squad didn't change. They're 65 points, and they're currently the cheapest heavy weapon squad. The Catachan heavy weapon squad went up by 5 points, so they're 70 points. The reason why GW did this is because a lot of people were running mass heavy weapon teams as pseudo battle line because they are regiment and they have easy access to orders, unlike Ogryns, Bullgryns, and Ratlings. So a lot of people were running heavy weapon teams in one of the more successful guard archetypes in reconnaissance and disruption with the siege regiment and recon element. But I think that this was a significant nerf. If you're running mortars and not the last cannon teams, then it is way too overpriced. Because in 11th edition, indirect got nerfed. So unless you have a spotter, you're hitting on sixes. And even with a spotter, you don't get to reroll hit rolls of one anymore. So in Grizzled Company, if your mortars had an order, they could reroll hit rolls of one. But now with the new indirect rolls, you cannot reroll hits when you are firing indirect. So this means that, especially in Grizzled Company, you're not going to get access to rerolls. And if you don't have a spotter, you're going to be hitting on sixes. So if you're running mortars, 70 points is way too overpriced. But what a lot of people were doing were running last cannons because the Catachan datasheet ability allows you to reroll hits and wounds of one against monsters and vehicles. So Catachan heavy weapons teams were actually really good with the last cannons because with certain terrain, if you are able to go up to a second level and the second level is 3 inches high, you can retain heavy. So you can scout out 6 inches, move up a level 3 inches, retain heavy, and get plunging fire, making the inaccurate heavy weapons teams actually very accurate. So you're hitting on threes. And I believe with the take aim, it can stack because it's +1 to your ballistic skill. So you have a base 5 up ballistic skill, you have plunging fire making it 4 up, and then you have take aim making it a 3 up, and then you can get heavy, which increases your hit. So I believe that you can have them shooting on 2-ups, rerolling ones to hit against monsters and vehicles. So in certain terrain, in certain maps, the Catachan heavy weapons teams were actually very effective. But if you're running anything that's not the last cannons, they're very ineffective. So what I really want GW to do is copy the Krieg heavy weapons team a little bit, and maybe the last cannons can cost an extra 5 points for 3, and have the base unit at 65. Maybe they can do that so that you're not penalized if you take other loadouts. That's a suggestion I have. Currently, I think that the Catachan heavy weapons team is garbage because of the points increase. If you're not using the last cannons, they're very inefficient and very ineffective. And competitively, they're useless. Next, we're going to talk about the Krieg Heavy Weapons Squad, which also had a similar points increase, but it's a lot worse because it went up 10 points. Originally in 10th edition, Krieg Heavy Weapons teams were 75 points, and the best loadouts were the Heavy Flamer. And so people were taking heavy weapons squads with heavy flamers at 75 points. And in 11th edition, they tried doing the granular Wargear thing, and they made Krieg heavy flamers 5 points each, and they dropped the squad itself to 60 points. That way, if you wanted to take heavy flamers, they would still be 75 points, but if you wanted to take the heavy stubber, for example, the Twin Krieg heavy stubbers, then you would only be paying 60 points for the unit. But again, like the Katachan heavy weapon squad, a lot of people were taking the last cannons, and the Krieg heavy weapon squad is really nice because you actually have 4 models in the unit. So if you use duty and honor on it, you have +4 OC. So the Krieg heavy weapons teams were pretty nice for that reason. But now that they went up to 70 points, if you want to take the heavy flamer loadouts, you're paying 85 points. And unless they make heavy flamers extra strength, when we discuss the changes to Marines, the points cost went up 10 points for the unit. And your heavy flamers are going to be wounding on a 4-up instead of a 3-up now because of the changes to the Marines. And so, unless they adjust some stuff later when the Marines Codex comes out, then I think that the Krieg Heavy Weapon Squad is going to be way too overpriced for what it is. The reason why they did this, like I said, is because one of the more popular and successful archetypes in Guard was running a lot of heavy weapons teams. But in general, Guard has a really low win rate. So I think that the points increase was not warranted at all. And I think this is really bad. Now, what I suggest for the heavy weapon squad is keep the points low, and instead of just having the Krieg heavy flamer on all the heavy weapon squad, maybe they can make the last cannons a little bit more expensive. And like I'll discuss later with the Leman Russ battle tanks, what they could do to solve the problem that GW has where everything is in multiples of 5 is say per 3 last cannons you can make it 5 points, and that way essentially you're paying about 1 2/3 points for each last cannon. But since they bundled it up, they can keep their multiples of 5 and make it easier to make points changes because realistically, most competitive players run all of the same kind of heavy weapon. So what GW could do to balance it a little bit is say instead of per Krieg heavy flamer, maybe they could make it per 3 Krieg heavy flamers, make it, let's say, 15 points. Per 3 Krieg last cannons, make it 10 points. And per 3 Krieg heavy stubbers, make it 5 points. And then drop the squad itself to 55 points or something. Maybe GW could do that. I think that would help internal balance a lot. So that's my thoughts about the heavy weapons teams. Now, we're going to do a very deep dive about the Leman Russ variants. Every single Leman Russ variant went down in points, and the Leman Russ Battle Tank, Eradicator, and Executioner went down 25 points, and the other variants went down 20 points, and I think this is amazing. And the reason why they went down so many points is because they started adding in granular weapon options like they promised they would. So each multi-melta, last cannon, and plasma cannon cost 5 points more. So if you wanted to run the Leman Russ battle tank with a last cannon and 2 plasma cannons, for example, it would cost 175 points because you'd be adding those Wargear options onto your base value. But if you wanted to run all bolters or all flamers, you could take a Leman Russ battle tank for a cheap cost of 160 points. And I think that this is amazing because it allows players to have more flexibility in their list building and maybe kind of lean into a tank spam stat check, which I think will become prevalent in the upcoming, at least mid-table meta. I think that these points drops to Leman Russes will actually make the overall guard win rate higher. While it won't affect the top players, and while I don't think it'll affect event wins, I think that it'll definitely affect the overall win rate because more casual and mid-table players, they're going to be able to bring more hulls in general and win a lot more battles by having a better stat check. Being able to bring one or two more Leman Russ tanks in your list makes your list a lot more durable. And for things like take and hold, for example, having durable hulls sitting on those giant objectives might actually help hold the objectives a lot more easily. So, what I think is that this is really good for the guard meta because I think that the win rates will go up, but it won't affect top players as much because at the top tables, experienced players know how to build their list with enough anti tank fire to deal with stat check armies. If you can deal with Catan, you can deal with Lehman Russes. And so, the sheer amount of firepower required to remove a Catan means that you have enough firepower to also remove Lehman Russes. And so I think at the top tables, people both build their lists and know how to maneuver their army around stat checklists. But in the more mid tables and against newer players, you will probably get more wins as a guard player playing a parking lot list, in the upcoming days. So I think that Granular Wargear options is a good start. But I have two gripes. Well, I have a lot more than two gripes, but I have two main gripes, and the first one is this. Plasma cannons are shit in 11th edition, and multi-meltas are really good. And the reason why is because hazardous rolls fail on a roll of 1 or 2 in 11th edition, whereas in 10th edition, a hazardous roll of 1 would fail, which this means that in 11th edition, you're going to be taking twice as many mortal wounds if you supercharge plasma weapons. So while the multi-melta does d6 damage plus melta 2 if you're within range, the plasma cannon only does 1 damage a shot and you need to supercharge it to do 2 damage. And if you're shooting against marines and things like that are a little bit tougher with more than 1 wound, you're going to want to supercharge your plasma cannons. So I don't think that plasma cannons are very good. And from what I've heard, overwhelmingly in the competitive community, people are not taking plasma cannons. So the fact that GW has them costed the same as multi-meltas is ridiculous in my opinion. And like I said, for the heavy weapon squad, one change that would really fix this would be paying 5 points per multi-melta and changing the plasma cannon so that it's 5 points for 2 plasma cannons. And if you do that, you can maintain your multiples of 5 and still pretty much keep your game design the way it is and allow for better granularity and internal balance. Now, one of the things that bolt action does better than 40k is that in bolt action you have extremely granular points cost, and certain war gear options can affect your list by 1 point or 4 points. They don't have multiples. It's a lot more continuous than 40k, which is a lot more discrete. An example of this is the infantry squad in bolt action. If you take an unarmed unit, you could take it for a handful of points. I think about 30 or 35 points for a basic unarmed squad. And you can add a pistol for 1 point, a rifle for 2 points, an SMG for 4 points, a light machine gun for 15 points. And on top of that, some units have anti-tank grenades for 2 points per model, and some units can get body armor for 5 points a model. So you can see that there's really no multiples there. You have odd numbers, you got even numbers, you have things that cost 1 point, and then you have things that cost 4 points, and then you have things that cost 15 points. It's all over the place, and it actually makes list building a little bit harder, but it makes your list building a lot more versatile, and it makes it easier to actually hit whatever points cap you're playing at. So granular weapon options are amazing because in 10th edition, you'd see a lot of lists with 1,985 points, 1,995 points. So having these granular Wargear options allows you to fill those points with something useful, especially if you can't get an enhancement in. So I think that having granular weapon options are amazing for just being able to hit the points cap. But my gripe is that they're not doing the plasma cannons and multi-meltas justice. The other gripe is that what I really wanted from GW was to go back to the old editions where you had the option not to take a sponson at all. So what I would really like GW to do is reduce the points cost even more for the hull and then charge extra. So maybe the flamers are 2 flamers for 5 points, maybe for the sponson weapons. Perhaps you could do that. Or because you can take flamers on the hull weapon as well, maybe you can do 3 flamers for 5 points. So reduce the hull to 150 points, for example, and then make it more expensive just to bring flamers, and then make it more expensive to bring bolters. And then you can make it so that 2 plasma cannons cost 5 points, and then maybe the multi meltas cost 5 points each. But the weirdness of this is that it doesn't specify that you have to take 2 of the same sponsons. So, from what I know currently, you could technically bring 1 multi-melta and 1 flamer. So that kind of causes some weirdness in your modeling as well. So I think that 2 multi-melta should be packaged together and cost 10 points. 2 plasma cannons should be packaged together and cost 5 points. And then maybe the 3 flamers can be packaged together to cost 5 points, for example. Maybe we can do something like that and make the base hull cheaper so that you can actually bring sponsonless tanks. And there are 2 reasons why I would like sponsonless tanks. First of all, I think sponsons are ugly. I just don't like the look of them. And I would like to play without sponsons. And that's a more narrative and thematic feel. Now, another more competitive gameplay reason is that having sponsons makes your tank very wide, and you can't fit through certain gaps if you have the sponsons. Now, if you play without sponsons, that means that you can actually fit through gaps that you normally wouldn't have been able to fit through. So when there are 3-inch or 4-inch gaps that your Leman Russ can't fit through, there are 2 options that you have. Well, 3 options technically. First, you can go around it. Second of all, you can increase the movement through move, 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 or by advancing and go up over the ruin and down. So you'd have to pay extra movement to just drive over the ruin. And the third option is just play Hammer of the Emperor or Steel Hammer, where you have a stratagem to drive through the wall. So those are ways to get through gaps. But what I would like is the option to bring no sponsons at all. And that way you can actually fit through gaps and it'll help your gameplay a little bit. So you lose damage output, but you get to bring a cheap hull and actually get to go through gaps. So I think that would be great in maybe using tanks to block choke points a little bit better and help you move block in 11th edition. So I would like that, and I do like the direction GW is going. I just don't like how they manifested it in this current data slate. It just doesn't make sense. And so now let's talk about the different variants and what I would do with these granular loadouts. First of all, let's talk about the Leman Russ Battle Tank because it's the first one here. The Leman Russ Battle Tank's data sheet ability is rerolling all hit rolls, so on all your weapons against an opponent that's on an objective. So this means that if you bring multi-meltas and last cannons, and even plasma cannons, then if you're firing at an opponent on an objective, you get to reroll all your hit rolls. So in combined arms, you get lethal hits. So being able to reroll your failed hit rolls or even fish for lethals in combined arms makes a Leman Russ battle tank really good. And so I would not bring flamers on the Leman Russ battle tank, and I think that the multi-melta and last cannon options are what I would go for. So I would probably take a Leman Russ battle tank for 175 points. And even with the nice Wargear options, do note that the Leman Russ battle tank was 185 points earlier, so it still went down by 10 points. So it is still a buff. And I think that the Leman Russ battle tank going down is a really good benefit to the guard. Now, the Leman Russ commander is very interesting because it used to be 235 points, and then it got dropped to 215 points. Now it's at 195 points. So compared to the Rogel Dorn commander, which is 290 points, if you take a Leman Russ commander instead, you have 95 points to put towards another unit. So that's another artillery piece. That is another 10-man unit of Krieg engineers or Aquilans. So the Leman Russ commander is actually very competitively pointed now. And even if you compare it to Lord Solar Leonta's command blob, that unit costs 260 points. A Leman Russ commander costs 195 points. And while Lord Solar does give you 3 squadron orders base, in certain detachments like Combined Arms and Hammer of the Emperor, you can give the Leman Russ commander a 15-point enhancement to give it 3 squadron orders. So you get to give out as many orders as Lord Solar Leontus does for as low as 210 points. Now, if you add goodies on it, it's going to cost more, but at the cheapest, if you're just trying to push out squadron orders, 210 points for 3 squadron orders is not bad at all. So the Leman Russ commander's datasheet ability changed. And originally, you could shoot upon death on a 2-up. But now, you can only shoot upon death on a 2-up if you are destroyed by ranged attacks. So the Leman Russ commander wants to play from the back, at least early on in the game. You want to keep it in the back so it can still give out orders. So the loadout I would put on it is I would probably use the Exterminator autocannon or the battle cannon because it has reasonably good range. And we don't want to bring the Demolisher battle cannon because that defeats the purpose of bringing the Leman Russ commander for cheap orders. It costs 15 points extra for the Demolisher battle cannon, and that just makes the Leman Russ commander a little bit more expansive. So we want to use the battle cannon or the Exterminator auto cannon, and I would probably add the last cannon and run heavy bolters on it because you want it shooting from the back at least for the first turn or two. So that's what I would do, and I would probably play it with one of the enhancements. So I would play it at 210 for the third order, and then add another 5 points for the last cannon, bringing it up to 215 points as before. But do remember, this also includes the bonus order enhancement. So 215 points for 3 squadron orders with some kind of battle cannon and last cannon and 2 heavy bolters is not bad. Like I said, you want to be playing it from range early on in the game. So you don't really want to take short range weapons like multi-meltas. You don't want the flamers. And the heavy bolters are free, essentially. So why not just bring the heavy bolters? And sure, you could save 5 points by not taking a last cannon, but if you're going to be in the back, the last cannon is pretty nice for hitting heavier targets. So that's what I would build the Leman Russ commander with. Now we have the Leman Russ Demolisher, which used to be 190 points, went down to 180 points, and now it is down to 160 points. The Leman Russ Demolisher's ability is that it can fire into combat. And the main gun has strength 14, AP minus 3, D6 damage. So the Leman Russ Demolisher is a very short range anti-tank kind of tank. And how I would build it is bring it with the multi-meltas and last cannons. I would not bring the plasma cannon because it has blast, so it defeats the purpose of its datasheet rule. And I wouldn't really bring it with flamers because there are other tanks that are better candidates for the flamer. The Demolisher has a high strength main gun. You want to be shooting it at elite infantry and enemy tanks and enemy monsters. So to keep with that theme, I would take the multi-meltas and last cannons to increase the damage, and the datasheet rule is just cool. And do note that multi-meltas and las cannons do not have blast, so you can fire them into combat as well. So if you get tagged by a Demon Prince doesn't kill you. You can fire everything into combat at the Demon Prince. So that is what the Leman Russ Demolisher is good at doing. Next, we're going to discuss the Leman Russ Eradicator. The Leman Russ Eradicator has a Strength 7, AP -1, 2 damage main gun that has ignores cover, D3 plus 6 shots, and it has blast. So the Leman Russ Eradicator, you can see, is already anemic. At Strength 7, you're going to be wounding most monsters and vehicles on 5s. And AP -1, while people say it's really good, it's really not good. AP -1 is miserable because, one, you're not even going to get a Terminator onto its invul save. You're going to need bonus AP from one source or another. And AP -1, while in 11th edition, it is a little bit more relevant. If you're firing at Marines with Armor of Contempt, well, guess what? You're back down to AP 0. So AP -1 is not good. Strength 7 is a little bit weak, although it's okay at hitting elite infantry. The main killer is the 2 damage. Because against Imperial Knight armigers bonded by a Knight Defender, against Catan, against Deathwing Knights, the Leman Russ Eradicator does absolutely no damage. It is ridiculously garbage. And so, why would you take a Leman Russ Eradicator? Well, it has ignores cover on the main gun, so it's accurate. It has blast, and it has more shots on average than other variants do. So it's really good at clearing hordes. At Strength 7, if you're firing against Toughness 3 units, then you're going to be wounding on a 2-up. AP -1 is okay against those kind of units because typically chaff units are 5-up save, 6-up save, 4-up save, and maybe 3-up save at best against sisters. So AP -1, it isn't bad if you're shooting at chaff. And the 2 damage, it's pretty meaningless because most chaff have 1 wound anyway. So the Leman Russ Eradicator is just an overpriced version of the Punisher, is my opinion. And the greatest part about it is the datasheet ability that gives it -1 to incoming damage if you have cover. And if you played in Hammer of the Emperor, you can also use the 2CP stratagem Ablative Plating on it, reducing damage by 1 again. Meaning that you could really block a lot of damage on that Leman Russ Eradicator if you played in Hammer of the Emperor and you have cover. Now, one thing that Morty and Glory mentioned is that a lot of enemies are bringing ignore cover. So Tau, they can use spotting to remove cover. Even the guard. If you're playing in Siege Regiment, or you use a stratagem from Grizzled Company, or you're bringing Hellhounds, you can strip cover. And so a lot of enemies have access to ignore cover now. So the chance that the Eradicator is in cover and not engaged in melee is pretty slim. So that datasheet ability, if the enemy is able to strip cover reliably, that datasheet ability doesn't exist. So the appearance of the extra durability doesn't matter against most armies. And one of the big winning lists in the meta is the Dark Angel list in Darkflight Pursuit. So there, the Ravenwing speeders get ignore cover natively by the detachment rule. So your Leman Russ Eradicator is completely useless against the Ravenwing. So, in my opinion, it's not competitive. It's even worse. The points drop is great, but I think to be competitive, that Leman Russ Eradicator in 11th edition probably needs to be less than 140 points. Now we're going to talk about the Executioner, and the Executioner is also a totally garbage variant. The reason why is while its datasheet ability is a little bit more useful than the Eradicator, you get +1 to hit against enemies that are half strength or lower. The Executioner has a plasma cannon as the main gun. And like I said earlier, in 11th edition, you're going to be taking twice as many mortal wounds from hazardous rolls. So having plasmas on a tank is really not good. Even with a Tech Priest Engine Seer, you're still going to be taking mortal wounds. And if you roll a bunch of 1s with the Tech Priest Engine Seer, and you roll a bunch of 1s with your hazardous rolls, you could possibly still kill yourself. Even with a Tech Priest Engine Seer, you could kill yourself over the course of a game just by rolling low on the hazardous rolls. So that's why I think the Leman Russ Executioner is pretty bad. Any tank that has a chance to deal damage to itself every single shooting phase, that's pretty bad. So I think that, like the Eradicator, the Executioner needs to have a points reduction, or maybe like some of the Dark Angels units, Executioner needs an upgrade. So you pay 5 points and you can reroll your hazardous rolls and your battle shock rolls, for example. Maybe they can have an upgrade like that. That would be really nice. Because in Dark Angels, they have an upgrade that allows you to reroll attacks and reroll your hazardous rolls. So if Guard got access to something like that, maybe an upgrade or a Wargear option just for this variant that allows you to reroll hazardous rolls, then maybe the Leman Russ Executioner could become better. But currently, as it stands, it's pretty trash. Next, we got the Leman Russ Exterminator. All throughout 10th edition, this was an amazing variant, one of the best, very popular, and pretty much any serious tank spam player who played competitively brought at least one Leman Russ Exterminator. I personally played two of these guys, and Leman Russ Exterminators are insanely good. The reason why is because they have the best datasheet ability. Their Withering Hail ability gives other guard units bonus AP. So if you're using battle tanks, the Leman Russ Exterminator goes well with the battle tank. Because a battle tank has AP -1, the Leman Russ Exterminator boosts it to AP -2 essentially, and then in Combined Arms or Hammer of the Emperor, you have a stratagem turning the Leman Russ battle tank's garbage AP -1 into AP -3, which is actually pretty good against enemy tanks that have a 2-up base save. So normally with AP -1, you would be doing damage with a 1/3 chance. And if they have Armor of Contempt, well, guess what? They're saving on a 2-up. Your -1 AP is useless. But at AP -3 now, you have 2/3 of a chance to get some damage in. And if they have Armor of Contempt, well, you still have a 50-50 chance of getting damage in. So being able to boost that AP -1 to AP -3 is really nice. And the Leman Russ Exterminator's main gun has Rapid Fire 4, so you get 8 shots when you're within 24 inches of an opponent. And the main gun's twin-linked. So while autocannons are not very effective by themselves, when they're twin-linked at strength 9, now they're really good at damaging tougher targets. And the Wargear loadout I would use on the Leman Russ Exterminator is 2 multi-meltas and a last cannon. And the reason why is because I see the Leman Russ Exterminator as a buff tank. So in Armored Infantry, in Grizzled Company, and if you use Commissar Yorick out of the Chimera, you can actually perform an order swap in those detachments. And what that means is that you can put your Exterminator in reserve, ingress it within bonus melta damage range of an enemy, and then you can give it an order. So in Grizzled Company, you use the stratagem Snap 2 to give it Take Aim. And that way it can get the bonus ballistic skill and reroll hit rolls of 1 against the enemy. And you're in bonus Melta range. That's why we take the Meltas, because I like to run one of my Exterminators out of reserve. And in Armored Infantry, any officer can give squadron orders. So this means that Gaunt's Ghosts can uppy downy, and every time they downy, they can give out up to 2 squadron orders. So this means that you could put 2 Exterminators in reserve, ingress both of them, drop Gaunt's Ghost within 6 inches of both units, and you can order both squadron orders to take aim. And so the Exterminators can be a little bit more accurate. And that way, instead of the enemy being able to focus down the Leman Russ Exterminator, you have it in reserve so they can't be shot at. So you just ingress them, order them when they come down, and then you can deal a lot of damage with these Leman Russ Exterminators in 11th edition. In 10th edition, you had to ingress outside of 9 inches. In 11th edition, you can ingress outside of 8 inches, so you can be in multi-melta range. So this is why the Leman Russ Exterminator, the way I like to play it, I would use the multi-meltas and the last cannons, so when they come out of reserve, they can hit really hard. Now we have the Leman Russ Punisher and the Leman Russ Vanquisher, which currently cost the same. And the base cost for the hull for each of them is 130 points. Now, this is insanely good because both of these variants kind of want to run flamers. And the reason why is because in 10th edition, people used to run 3 Vanquishers just for the hull because they were cheap. And Vanquishers were 145 points in 10th edition, and the Punisher was 150 points. So a lot of people would run triple Vanquishers, but not run Punishers. Although one guy did place or win a GT running one Punisher in 10th edition. In 11th edition, they cost the same points cost, and due to the step costs, there might be a benefit to bringing a Leman Russ Punisher instead of a third Vanquisher. Because in Grizzled Company, the Leman Russ Punisher with the bonus AP order from Aquilan Eye actually does a lot of damage. If you bring a triple Flamer Punisher with Aquilan Eye order in Overwatch, it can destroy on average 8.3 toughness 3 4-up save models. So you can wipe out nearly an entire Scion unit or a Kazarkin unit in Overwatch with the Leman Russ Punisher. So in Grizzled Company especially, I think that it might be a good idea to try one with the Aquilan Eye enhancement on one of your tank commanders, because while in 10th edition people used to throw out the Hellhounds, the Leman Russ Punisher costs less than a third Hellhound. A third Hellhound would cost you 135 points. A Leman Russ Punisher costs you 130 points. So, due to the step costs and the nature of 11th edition, requiring you to strip cover to retain your accuracy, you want to keep your Hellhounds alive. So you may want to use your Hellhounds not as bait units, not as frontline units, but as your second wave units, and instead throw out a Leman Russ Punisher as your frontline units instead if you're running a tank spam list. So I think there will be some play for the Leman Russ Punisher, and you can ignore the Wargear options for the Punisher. The only reason you would ever bring a Punisher is to fulfill the anti-infantry role, because its data sheet ability gives you dev wounds against infantry, but it doesn't give you dev wounds against monsters and vehicles. So in the anti-infantry role, the Leman Russ Punisher is really good, and skewing towards the anti-infantry role, you want to give it triple flamers and have it be an Overwatch threat as well. And that also means that you can get the move order, or just opt not to give it an order at all. So unless you want to make the main gun a little tiny bit more accurate, then it doesn't necessarily need an order if you're just going to use it to perform actions and fire Overwatch. So it's a cheap hull that you can bring to enhance your stat check style of list, and it doesn't necessarily need an order to function, in my opinion. So I would just play it with triple heavy flamers at 130 points and have a cheap hull that's cheaper than your third Hellhound. That's a trade and bait unit. That's how I would play it. Now, the Leman Russ Vanquisher is played pretty much exactly the same way. The only difference is that instead of the Gatling gun, you have a Vanquisher cannon. And a lot of experienced players don't rely on the Vanquisher cannon staying heavy to do damage. What they do is use the Vanquisher as a cheap hull instead and push it up early in the game. And people like David Gaylord from the Fireside channel on YouTube mentioned that they play the Vanquisher with triple flamers. So it is a cheap hull, costs the same as a Punisher, but if you want to have a slight chance of doing anti-tank damage, you could take Vanquishers instead of Punishers. And the way I'd play it is 2 ways. I would originally start my list with triple Flamers or triple Bolters on the Vanquisher. And if I had points left over, I would use my Vanquisher as a way to pretty much enhance the damage output. So I'd start it with triple bolters, for example, and if I happen to have 5 points left, I'd add a last cannon to it. If I happen to have 10 points left at the end of the list, I'll add multi-meltas to it. Because the Vanquisher, you're going to want to push it up early. And if it dies, then it's 130 points you lost. If it doesn't die, then you can fire with heavy. So the Leman Russ Vanquisher, like the Punisher, is a trade unit, But the difference is that the Punisher is a dedicated anti-infantry unit, whereas the Vanquisher is kind of split. With the triple flamers, you can overwatch with it. It's not going to be as effective as the Punisher, but in your shooting phase, it's also going to be okay with the Vanquisher cannon as well, because you can reroll wounds against monsters and vehicles. So as long as you can hit with it, then its capability to wound is pretty good. And it also has AP minus 4, so against medium tanks that have 3 up save, the attack will be unsavable. So the Leman Russ Vanquisher is a very good unit. And now that they're down to 130 points, I really think that the tank spam parking lot stat check is going to be a very popular style, at least in mid-table metas. And as you can see, those are all the changes that the guard got. So now we're going to talk about the change to one of the detachments. You can see here that Recon element went down from 3 detachment points to 2 detachment points. And I think one of the reasons why is because Wesley St. Hines, after he went to WTC, was complaining that he was probably going to quit guard because every game was a struggle to score points. And so I think this is one of the reasons why GW dropped this detachment to 2 detachment points. And this is great because in classic recon element lists, people would bring a lot of Battleline units, cavalry units, like Adelan Rough Riders and Death Riders, usually one Scout Sentinel, and they would run Scions. And the reason why is because Recon element is toothless. In a classic combined arms style of guard army, usually your battle line go out to screen and your tanks sit back and deal damage. Recon element has no damage output by itself because it does not give any buffs to your tanks, which are your primary damage dealers. So what a lot of people do is that they bring Scions instead because Scions are infantry units that are very efficient for their points cost at dealing damage. And having recon element at 2 detachment points now means that you can add bridgehead strike and make your scions a little bit more potent, give them a little bit more OC, and make them battle lines. So if you want, I guess you could take more scions. Although I don't think most people take more than a few units anyway. So adding bridgehead strike might make it easier for the recon element to stay competitive because usually they bring scions anyway. So I think that the recon element going down to 2 detachment points is pretty good for the players who play recon element. Personally, I have never played that detachment, nor am I interested in it because I like to play tank spam lists. Because for me personally, as a competitive player, I like to finish my games on time. And it's easier to move 12 tanks than it is to move 200 infantry models. So now we're going to go over the sample list using the new points costs. So our sample list is going to be played in the Grizzled Company with the priority assets disposition. And in this disposition, essentially what you have to do is hold objectives and push buttons to score actions for scoring your primary missions. And Grizzled Company is great for a tank spam list because your tanks can reroll hit rolls of 1 as long as they're ordered. And each officer gets an extra order. So this means that your tank commanders all have 3 orders each instead of 2, which makes them a lot more efficient on order economy. And like I mentioned earlier, having access to the Snap to It stratagem allows you to use tanks out of reserve freely. So in our list, we have 1 Rogaldorn tank commander at 290 points with 3 orders. We have 2 Leman Russ tank commanders at 200 points. So we're going to be running each of those Leman Russ tank commanders with bolter sponsons and the last cannon hull option, and autocannons as the main gun. And one of the tank commanders will have the Aquilan Eye enhancement, which gives the option for a different order type, which is target weak spot. And what that does is increase AP for one of your tanks instead of increasing ballistic skill with take aim. So Aquilan Eye is really good on your flamer tanks. And Going to the flamer tanks, we have two hellhounds, which are excellent at stripping cover. And if the hellhounds die, you can still remove cover using one of the stratagems. And then we have a Leman Russ Punisher with flamers for 130 points. And then we have two Leman Russ Vanquishers. One of the Vanquishers will be a Flamer Vanquisher for pushing up early and trading, and another Vanquisher will have Bolter Sponsons and Last Cannon Hull Weapon. And the reason why we armed one of the Vanquishers like this is because we had 5 points left at the end, so we could just change the Vanquisher to Bolters and add a Last Cannon. And then we have two Leman Russ Exterminators. One of the Exterminators will be kept in reserve, and it'll be armed with the Melta and Last Cannon profiles, coming in at 175 points. The other Exterminator will have Bolter Sponsons and the Last Cannon Hull Weapon, and it'll start on the board. And then we have a Hydra. And the reason we're bringing a Hydra is because a Hydra is dirt cheap at 90 points, and it has full hit rerolls against flying enemies, and the autocannons have twin linked and anti-fly 2 up, making it really, really good into flying targets. And what kind of flying targets will you see? Well, there's Dark Angels Land Speeder spam, some of the Necron units, Tau units, Space Marine units like jump pack units. So there are a lot of things that fly in the game, especially the Xenos tanks. They're usually grav tanks of a sort, and they're on flying bases. So the Hydra is really good against that, and the damage output is very efficient for its points cost. So we have a Hydra. And our final tank in the list is Commissar Graves. Commissar Graves has a 4-up invulnerable save built in, and Commissar Graves can give out 2 orders in Grizzled Company. Now, Commissar Graves cannot give out the take aim order, but she can give out move, 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 duty and honor, and fix bayonets. So usually what you'll want to do is self-order Commissar Graves fix bayonets. And the benefit of having that extra order is that you could give one of your flamer tanks move, move, move. And when they're firing the Hunter Killer missile, they will still be able to reroll hit rolls of 1 through the Grizzled Company detachment rule. So even having an order that's not take aim is useful in Grizzled Company. And also do note that you get to reroll hit rolls of 1 in shooting and in melee. So since Commissar Graves is, I would say, primarily a melee unit, Grizzled Company is a great detachment to run Commissar Graves in. And if you have trouble holding objectives, while Leman Russes only have 3 objective control, Commissar Graves actually has 5 objective control, as much as a Rogel Dorn. So if you need to put OC on something, then Commissar Graves is great. And we have 2 Tech Priest Engine Seers in our list. And the reason why is because we want to make our tanks a little bit more durable, especially our tank commanders at the end of the game. And playing priority assets, you need to push buttons every turn in some of the missions. And in order to do that and maintain damage output, you need some action monkeys. And tech priests are excellent action monkeys because you can mark a tank, send them up to bait, and then they can move up with the rest of your tanks. So they can send out some bait tanks with a 4-up invul save, forcing enemies to expose more of their anti-tank units to complete the kill, and then you can trade into those enemies very efficiently. And Tech Priest Engine Seers can also repair damaged vehicles, and since they don't have very good shooting output, if you're able to keep them within 3 inches of a tank and be on an objective, then you can start pushing buttons with the Tech Priest. And while a lot of people did not like Tech Priest Engine Seers in 10th edition, in 11th edition, I think they're really good because of the changes to cover. AP is a little bit more lethal in 11th edition, so having access to the 4-up invulnerable save helps you against last cannons firing at your tank, for example. So these tech priests really help keep the tanks alive, and you also have Commissar Graves, which innately has a 4-up invulnerable save, and you have a total of 12 tank hulls. So there are people who can deal with this, but there are also a lot of players who can't deal with 12 hulls. So these tanks are really durable. You have a lot of damage output with the detachment, and you get to play tanks out of reserve because you have Snap to it to order them out of reserve as well. So having the points drops and the granular Wargear allows you to take your Leman Russ Vanquishers and your Leman Russ Punisher, giving you a lot of cheap little hauls that the enemy has to deal with. And once you have that 4-up invulnerable save with the possibility of repairing damage, the enemy's really going to want to secure kills. And so on turn 1, if you go first and you have to score an action, you might want to throw a 4-up invulnerable save on a Leman Russ Punisher and push it up to do an action. And while you most likely will lose that tank, it is now 130 points. So it's a Leman Russ haul that's almost as cheap as a Hellhound that you're losing. And if the enemy is playing an infantry style list, or they're playing a more combined arms style list with infantry and tanks, they're going to expose their tanks first to destroy your Flamer Punisher so that their infantry doesn't get shredded when they come out. So once they destroy your Punisher, now the rest of your tanks can move out and trade up against the enemies that expose themselves. And then you can pretty much mop up the rest of the enemy's list with all your other units because your Exterminator, your Hydra, and your Rogaldorn Tank Commander has a lot of volume as well. So while the Punisher and the Flamer Vanquisher has a really good Overwatch threat, your other tanks can also destroy them in the shooting phase as well. So infantry armies are really going to struggle against tank spam lists. So I think that this is a list that you can try. Personally, I don't like priority assets. I don't like having to push buttons. So I most likely will not be playing this list. But if you are a fan of tank spam lists, I think that this is actually quite competitive. You have a lot of teeth in this list. And you have your Tech Priest Engine Seers, your Leman Russ Punisher, and other units like Commissar Graves that can sit back for a turn and score an action for you if needed. So I think that, this is, at least for the mid table, this should win you a lot more games than you did in the previous Dataslate. So thank you all for watching. And if you have any opinions, then please feel free to leave it in the comments below. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to like and subscribe. And as always, praise the machine god and good luck in your future games playing the guard.
To the god of all machines, to the god of all machines, his simply decides are supreme.